around that time. And I wrote this story. Yeah, you dig the hair, right? I know. I wrote this story called Appointment with an Archangel, and it was about this guy who dies and he goes to heaven and he has a conversation with an angel. And I showed it to my teacher and she said, "Rick, this is really good. You got to try to get this published." And I was like, "You can do that?" She said, "Well, we can try." So she helped me to find the name of a magazine, Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. And we sent it off. And I was so excited, I thought I was going to be rich and famous. Every day I'd run out to the mailbox, because this is long before email, so I had to wait for the mail to come. 2 months passed, and finally, this came in the mail. That's my first rejection note. Yes. And if you look at it, you can see it's so old that it's done on carbon paper with a typewriter, because we didn't even have printers back then. I was 13. The guy was very nice. He said, "Dear Richard, first of all, let's get it straight. There's no such thing as being too young to write. If you're old enough to write, go for it." He goes on to say, "This is a really nice story. We really like it, but we can't publish it because it has supernatural stuff, and we're a sci-fi magazine. We can't use it. But keep trying." My mom was so proud that I got rejected. She took this and she put it in a frame and she hung it in our house. And I had to look at it every time I walked into the living room. Yeah. True story. When I was in college, my mom's house burned to the ground. Everything was destroyed. Except this. They pulled the rejection note out of the fire, got a mark on it, and it's still in a frame in my mom's place. Rejection is a very powerful thing. But I did keep writing like the guy said. I went off to college in Texas, where I'm from, and I got my degree and I got my teacher certificate. Both of my parents were teachers, so I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. I went on to teach middle school. That's a picture of me when I was a teacher with some of my students. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I taught in Texas, and I taught here in the Bay Area, in San Francisco for a number of years in the 90s. So I had a great time with that, and I was known as a teacher who liked doing stories, who liked telling stories in the classroom, and even sometimes showing up in costume. There's me at Presidio Middle School as my Shakespearean self. There's me telling a story from the colonial days, and there's me in Civil War garb during 8th grade American history class. Anyway, my students would always say, "Mr. Riordan, you always tell stories in your classroom. Why don't you, make books or something for kids?" I didn't know what to do with that, but when I was living out here in the Bay Area, I did start feeling a little homesick for my hometown of San Antonio, where I'd grown up. And I started thinking, maybe that whole thing that they say about writing what you know, maybe there's something to that. I never wanted to write about San Antonio when I lived there, but living out here, I thought, well, maybe I could do a story. I decided to try my hand at a murder mystery, because at the time, that's what I really liked to read. So I began writing. This is my outline for one of my murder mysteries. I used a sort of flowchart software that I had in my classroom called Inspiration. And I put it together, and every box that you see is a chapter in the book. And you can see I've written notes, and I've crossed things out, and I've moved things around. This would be hanging on my door as I worked in my house. And so I would just go back and forth. I had no idea what I was doing, but I always used to tell my students that you should outline, so I figured I'd probably have to try. When I was done, that's what I had. That's the manuscript from my very first novel, which was called Big Red Tequila. Anybody want to guess how many pages that is? What does that look like to you? Yeah, what do you think? About 1,000? Any other guesses over here? Yeah, what do you think? About 300? Yeah, it felt like 1,000, but it's actually closer to 300. It's about 375. And if you look inside, you would see that every page has correction marks on it. Covered with corrections from my editor. I went through 14 drafts of the manuscript. So next time you guys hear it, you're feeling real bad about having to do a second draft of your essay. Yeah, just remember me doing 14 drafts of 375 pages. Was it fun? No. But, something I found out, he just goes with the territory. No one has ever written anything perfect the first time. It cannot be done. Revising is just part of the deal. You have to revise. That's how you make it good. But it finally came out, and there was the cover. Big Red Tequila, everything in Texas is bigger, even murder. It did pretty well. It won some awards. The editor said, well, great, let's make it a series. Let's do a bunch of these. So I started writing one of these a year. There's the second one, The Widower's Two-Step. This is about someone who's killing off country western music singers, which is a personal fantasy of mine. But anyway. The Devil Went Down to Austin. Oh, this was fun to do. I took scuba diving lessons for this one because there's this lake right outside Austin called Lake Travis, and somebody told me one time that there's a forest of pecan trees at the bottom of the lake. I said, really, why? Well, they flooded it. It used to be orchards, and they flooded it, so at 120 feet of water, there's a forest at the bottom, and it's really, really creepy. And I said, that's really weird. I got to get down there and see this. So I took lessons. I went diving into Lake Travis, and I ended up writing this book, which is about a murderer who's hiding his victims in the trees at the bottom of this lake. Oh, that was some creepy stuff. Here is one of my books. That's The Widower's Two-Step in a Foreign Language. Can you tell what language?
Japanese.
Japanese. Very good, yeah. If you look at that, and by the way, I thought I just assumed that it said Widower's Two-Step in Japanese, and then someone who speaks Japanese said, oh no, that says Honky Tonk Girl. Some little things publishers do, like change the title and not. And if you look at it, you can probably see that to us, the book is backwards, right? It's bound on the other side, and if you look inside, in Japanese, you read in columns, up to down, like this. I was talking one time at a school here in the Bay Area, and this girl said, oh, so that's why. I said, what? She said, I was on the plane one time, and this guy was reading in Japanese, and he kept going, anyway, these were adult mystery novels, right? They're, really weren't appropriate for kids. But I was a teacher. There's a picture of me in my classroom in San Antonio. And one day, this 8th grade girl raised her hand in one of my classes and said, hey, Mr. Riordan, can I read one of your books? I want to do a book report on Big Red Tequila. And I got this horrified look on my face. No! It's inappropriate. There's violence and there's bad language. The kid's eyes all lit up. They went, really? You can probably guess what happened. They all went out, bought copies of the book, started highlighting the bad words. I got very embarrassed. And again, they said, why aren't you writing books we can read? I mean, you're a middle school teacher. You tell good stories in the classroom. Why are you writing adult mystery novels? You should be writing stuff for kids. And looking back on it, I realized they have a point. But at the time, I said, no, I don't have any ideas. What it took for me to become a children's writer was my own son, my older son, Haley. There he is, in 1st grade. He's 17 now. He doesn't look like that anymore. But when he was in 1st grade, he was having a very tough year. He did not like reading. He didn't like writing. He, it turns out, has ADHD, attention deficit disorder, and dyslexia, which makes it really hard for him to be in the classroom and really hard to read. And, I've worked with ADHD dyslexic kids my whole life as a teacher, but when it's your own kid, it's a little tougher. When you're an English teacher and your kid is saying, I don't like to read. Well, isn't there anything that you like that you're doing in class? And that, because I read to him forever, right? I mean, there's us with Thomas the Tank Engine when he was a little guy. And he said, well, we are doing this one unit that I really like. It's on Greek mythology. And there he is. That's Haley in 1st grade, dressed up as Hades. And they were doing this wax museum where you have this little button in front of each kid, and if you step on the button, they're supposed to recite their lines, like they're a wax figure coming to life. It was very cute. He said, I really like that. I like the gods and the monsters. Okay, I've done Greek mythology with my kids forever. It's like always one of my favorite units. Let me tell you some stories. So I started telling him the Greek myths for bedtime stories. I told him Athena, the goddess of wisdom, Ares, god of war, Poseidon, the god of the sea.
And apparently
But eventually, I ran out of stories, and he got mad. Dad, tell me another one. I said, well, there aren't anymore. There haven't been any new ones in 2,000 years. He said, well, make one up. I was like, okay, how do I make up a Greek myth? I thought about it. I thought about this creative writing assignment that I used to do up in the city at Presidio Hill School, where the kids would create their own demigods and decide, you know, who's your hero, who's your mom, who's your dad, what adventures do you have, what monsters do you fight. So I decided to make a story like that for him. I decided to make the kid ADHD and dyslexic, like my son, so he could relate to him. And I said, you know, if you have ADHD and dyslexia, that could mean that you're a demigod. And he was like, yeah. So, off the top of my head, I created Percy Jackson, who's a 12-year-old boy. He lives in New York. He's never known his father. He thinks his father is dead. He finds out his father is not dead. His father is actually Poseidon, god of the sea. I hope that wasn't a spoiler for anybody. And Percy has to go on these adventures. He meets this girl named Annabeth, who's also a demigoddess. And his teacher is actually Chiron. He's a centaur. He's a horse from the waist down. He has a brother who is a cyclops. Grover is actually a satyr. He a goat from the waist down and enjoys eating enchiladas in tin cans. I made it up off the top of my head. It took me about 3 nights to tell my son the story. And when I was done, he said, Dad, that was really pretty good. I think you ought to write it down. I said, I don't have time. You know, I'm already writing a book a year. I'm teaching full time. I don't have time. I said, no, really, Dad, you need to write it down. I said, okay, fine. I wrote it down, I let some of my students read it, and they all liked it. They gave me some great suggestions. For instance, the first title that I had for the book was Son of the Sea God. And my students said, Mr. Riordan, you can't call it that, because then you give away who his dad is. I was like, oh yeah. So I changed the title, and I called it The Lightning Thief. We sent it off to a bunch of publishers, and there was a lot of excitement, and I finally got a publisher with Disney Publishing. They really liked it. They said, yeah, we have this great idea for the cover. We're going to make it look like this. And I don't know what you guys think. I looked at that and I said, wow, that's boring. So they changed it, and the first cover for The Lightning Thief in America actually looked like that. Now, this was made by the guy who designed the covers for video games. So you can kind of see where that comes from. You got Medusa and the Minotaur, and everybody looks at the dog and says, hey, it's Fluffy from Harry Potter! And I had to explain it. It's actually based on Cerberus, who's 2,000 years older than Fluffy, but whatever. Some people really liked this cover, some people really didn't like it, so they finally changed it, and now... That's the cover you've probably seen for The Lightning Thief. It's so funny, though, every country where the book is published, they have a slightly different idea of what the cover should look like. In the UK, that was their first idea for a cover for The Lightning Thief. But nobody can tell what that thing is at the bottom. It's supposed to be the Master Bolt, the lightning bolt, but they couldn't tell, so they decided to put something on the cover that everyone could recognize. It's Lightning Shoe. Some people really liked that cover, and some people didn't. We had this huge debate about which cover was better, and I went over to the UK, talked to all the kids over there, and of course they liked the American cover better, and everybody here liked the British cover better. So it wasn't working out real well, but finally they changed it, and now in the UK it looks like this.
Ooh.
Yeah, not bad. And it's come out in something like 35 foreign languages now. It's more every day. There is in French, Le Voyage de Parfait. I thought when I got this I would read it because I took French in college, and I figured, I wrote the book, how hard could it be? I couldn't get past the title. Le Voyage de Parfait. go, what does this mean? What does that mean? One day she emailed me, she said, Mr. Riordan, please, what is a wedgie? Never mind. Chinese even Korean. My favorite one is still the first German version of the Germans. I was warned. Everybody said the Germans are very serious people. And they like dark, somber covers, very serious images. Okay, I was preparing myself for the serious German cover. And then I get it. And it has the Minotaur in his own. Jackson would be a 5-book series. I wanted Percy to go from 12 to 16. So the second book came out, Sea of Monsters. There's the American and the British covers.